Hello, 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 welcome. This is G. You're watching Allastrology, and this video is going to discuss some of the more significant things that are going to be happening for May of 2023. And yes, we have another eclipse. So here we go. We're just going to have a little discussion first before we look at the deep dive on the chart. I might split it into another video. We'll see. Not everybody's up for looking at a chart. So I'm going to kind of go over some of the general energies for the month of May. And then, we'll do the deep dive. Now, May's really going to be big, okay? Because we have a lot of things happening other than the eclipse, right? We have an eclipse. Right at the beginning of May, we'll have an eclipse. Okay. So it's a lunar eclipse. Okay. It's an eclipse in Scorpio energy and it's lunar. So when we think about Scorpio, the keywords, that's important to know because then that tells us what this eclipse could be about. It's not just, oh my God, it's an eclipse. Like, chill out. Just talk about what the keywords mean so that we can have a rational, logical, calm conversation. Okay. So Scorpio is usually going to be something that is intense because that's Scorpio energy. It's intense. And it can even be wounds about the past, right? And usually shared energy because it's Scorpio. It's not just about my values, but it's normally our values, right? So I'm recording this video in March. Is that right? Yeah, I'm recording this video in March. And at this time, this is the week of, it's like the Friday on the week of where we had the SVB and Silvergate. And I know there's a couple of other banks in there where these, we're finding out some of these banks are not, they're just not stable. And so, so that comes when we talk about banking, we normally think of Taurus energy, the opposite of Scorpio, but they run along the same line of energy. So Taurus is my values. This is mine. This is what I own. This is what is valuable to me, right? This is also like self-worth. Am I worthy? Like, this is Taurus energy. At the opposite is Scorpio energy. And so this is going to be like our shared values. Now, Taurus is the intake. This is how I receive. So at the opposite of that is Scorpio, which is how I let go, what I'm letting go, right? Even though it's our shared values, it's the 8th house in the chart when you're looking at your chart, but it comes, think about it as taxes because this is your income. And then what happens because you have an income, you have to pay taxes on that income, right? Or maybe some haven't paid taxes on certain incomes, right? Or haven't claimed, right? It's like the 8th house can kind of be intense in that way. Cause it's like, oh, well, what do you know? All of a sudden there's back taxes or there's stuff that wasn't claimed, right? So we kind of think about it like that. And I'm only using these words because it's about banking. And then when it comes to banking, this is where I have my money and my values, but if I put it in a bank, all of a sudden this entity, this institution kind of represents a holding place for our shared values, you see? So Taurus energy, that first eclipse in the month before, right? In April, we had an eclipse in Taurus. Now, when I'm recording this, the eclipse in Taurus hasn't even happened yet. Yeah. That's actually, it hasn't happened. So, when we, and I'm sorry, let me back up for a second because I said the eclipse in Taurus. And I know that might be confusing because if you look in the month of April, you might be wondering, what exactly am I referring to? And so when we look at April, like some of the events that I've done videos for, right? If you haven't seen your rising sign video, go check it out because it talks about the eclipse for you in your chart. It says this is where the eclipse is happening if you're such and such rising sign. And so if you don't know your rising sign, I'm just going to do a little take care of a little piece of business right here. If you don't know what your rising sign is, like if you're lost, right, just comment to me and I will help you in any way that I can, because that's the point of this channel, right? To get people the knowledge of their life, of who they are, into their hands. And so moving along, April 19th, an eclipse, and it's in Aries, but it's at a degree where it's like, this is a Taurus thing, right? Because it's at 2950. So if you were to look up 2950, and, if you're an astrology geek like me, you know that 2950 is actually 0 degrees of Taurus. So on the channel, there's also videos that talk to you about the meaning of, like, what does 0 degrees of Taurus mean? And it's not the end all be all, but it may be some stuff you haven't heard before, and you might be willing to stretch your mind a little bit, and you might be curious. So if you're curious about that, I will include that video series down below so that you have that extra knowledge. So when we're talking about, that was the eclipse I was referring to when I said the eclipse in Taurus, because at that degree, it's all about what are our values, and so banking, it was a big deal. And so a new beginning with banking, something happening there. And so I'm explaining, and I feel like it's important for me to talk about all of this, because when you have an eclipse in Scorpio, it's like, okay, what is going on, right? If it's a release and a let go, Scorpio energy, and it's a full moon, it's a lunar eclipse. Right. So I'm not going to go any deeper than that, right? This is just to talk about the events of May. And this is right at the front end of May. And I'll have a video for that eclipse with a chart where we deep dive. Okay. This is not that video, right? This is just to give you the general overview. So that's like at the beginning of the month. There's some sort of a release ending, full moon energy, and it's a completion. Okay. Has to do with shared values. All right. Now, it could be things that you shared, like with partners. So it can be wounds from the past. It can be emotional, deep, like events that literally occurred in your life. It doesn't always have to be like a hurt or a wound because we lost money. It doesn't have to be that. This can be like emotional trauma, like we went through something together. It can be like that because think of Mars as the ruler of Scorpio. Mars and Pluto, you're right. But Mars is typically a warrior. And so think about people who go to battle together. The wounds, the shared trauma, the experiences, that bond that they have, blood bond, doesn't even have to be blood bond, right? You know how you hear the blood brothers because they fought together, or even people who kind of grow up together and they like make a pact and they're like, yeah, we're blood brothers, right? Even though they don't share the same blood. What do you see them do in the movies, right? They would like take a knife and cut each other's hands. And of course we don't do this nowadays, because there's anyway. And then they literally go like that, which is them combining their blood and bonding them together because of their experience, because of what they went through, right? So that's just to give you that little piece, right? And then when we go down into like the 2 days after the eclipse, we have the sun in the sign of Taurus, banking, money, our values, and it's conjunct Uranus. So typically somebody in charge, conjunct Uranus, also someone who's in charge. The sun and Uranus, they're both people who are authority figures, and they're going to be conjunct. Uranus means it's something new. It can be shocking. It can be surprising. It's in Taurus, so it's something we value. Does it have to do with banking? Think of all the Uranian keywords: digital, right? Technology, tech industry, tech banks, tech banking, absolutely, Uranus and Taurus. But this would also be like the cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, like it's all of that too, right? But shocks and surprises, okay? So that's a couple of days after that. And again, we're going to do the video and the deep dive with the charts a little bit later. I'll show you just a rough overview of this, of how this looks on the map, right? And then we'll look at the degrees and the dates on those. So, but this is just to give you a little descriptor up front. Now, 5 days after the sun and the Uranus are together, right? The two authority figures, we have Mercury in the sign of Taurus. So when you're hearing me say these signs in your head, keywords should be popping up. And the keywords that should be popping up are going to be Taurus and Scorpio keywords, right? because we began with an eclipse in Scorpio, and now we've got the sun and Uranus together in the sign of Taurus, and now we've got Mercury, the planet Mercury, in the sign of Taurus. Okay, and it's beginning a retrograde. It's beginning a retrograde. I'm going to have a separate video out just for the Mercury retrograde so we can watch its travel, its journey through the sign of Taurus. We'll see what degrees it happens at and all that, and the shadow zone and the dates, because we don't want to sign contracts until Mercury has cleared its shadow zone in Taurus. That's important because it has to do with your income and your money, your work, right? Your values. Then, okay, then there's something significant that, for whatever reason, as I was looking at the charts and looking ahead, preparing to do the rising sign readings, I always have to do the general overview so that I understand what's going on before I do a rising sign, right? So in looking at that, there's something fascinating happening with Jupiter. Okay. And we know that Jupiter is going into the sign of Taurus, right? We know this is happening. We know it's going to be happening beginning in June, right? Beginning in June. So we have to pay attention to what Jupiter is going to be doing, because Jupiter is going to be doing a retrograde later in the year, later in 2023. Jupiter is not a super fast mover. Hold on. I need a little bit of water at this moment. Hold on. Jupiter enters Taurus and it stays in a sign roughly for a year, sometimes 14 months. That's a normal speed for Jupiter. So when Jupiter goes through Taurus, all my signals, all my alerts, all my bells, all my flags kept going off, right? And so I looked at it. And wouldn't you know it, Jupiter does a damn retrograde in the same degrees as Mercury's retrograde in the sign of Taurus. So without giving the degrees and the dates and doing all that, just from what I've talked about, we know for 2023, banking is a big deal because it's the sign of Taurus. Our values, our money, commodities, investments, like this is all on the table of discussion. And if Mercury's doing a retrograde, we know something's happening and something is changing, right? And then we know that Jupiter later in 2023 is going to be doing a retrograde on the same degrees that Mercury did. That's telling us something is changing. There was something that Mercury talked about because it's the news. There was something that we heard. So somebody who's likely in charge of the monetary systems, this can be globally, because at this time, we also have to consider that Pluto is in Aquarius already at this time, right? At the end of March, right? We have Pluto entering the sign of Aquarius. So by May, Pluto's already in Aquarius, and Aquarius energy is global systems. Global systems. Finances can be involved in that as too. The global markets can be involved in that. Okay. Global banking, right? Like the International Monetary whatever foundation. I'm not an economist. I'm not a banker. I'm not any of that. But I try to, educate myself enough so I can talk intelligently in the video, because I see it in the chart and I'm like, okay, so what is that? What is that in the real world? That's what it is. International monetary whatever. And so I think it's called the IMOF. And so they kind of, you tell me in the comments, you tell me what I'm talking about. You tell me what it is that could also fall into this pocket. But there's a global system. Something is happening and something's altering and changing. Remember, Aquarius energy squares Taurus energy. So that's a stress and a tension. So that means whatever's happening in Taurus, Uranus is over there, and it's part of this conversation. It's part of the conversation. So Pluto goes into Aquarius for a little bit and then backs out in 2023, right? And it won't come back in until 2024. But all the while, once Pluto backs out, it goes back into government and businesses again, and corporations. Corporations. You see, Capricorn is corporations, business and government. But Aquarius, the next sign after Capricorn, you have to think, when we're in our world, what's bigger than that? What's bigger than a corporation, right? The systems that oversee those smaller systems, the systems that oversee the corporations, right? So we think of a global system and how all that works, and the fact that Pluto's going to be changing and transforming that. And so maybe what we're finding out is there isn't a global system set in place to kind of give a checks and balance of these things. That's a possibility, right? If there is, put it in the comments. Let me know what that is, right? But digital. You guys have heard me been talking about digital money, digital dollars since 2019. I've been talking about this because when Uranus went into Taurus, it's digital. It's digital money, it's digital dollars. And if we're having issues and if we're having things happening, if we're having instability, there's when we think of Jupiter in Taurus, what does Jupiter do, folks? It expands, it adds to things, and its values, its money because it's Taurus, right? So it's almost like, okay, what is it going to be adding to, right? Conversations about banking, looking at the money and the finances. And Taurus is grounded, it's material, it's tangible, it's the earth. So the earth and the importance of the earth, but Mercury doing a retrograde and then Jupiter in the same degrees of Taurus energy. I gotta and I didn't even tell you the most important thing. The most important thing is the degrees of that eclipse at the beginning of the month. The degrees that it's at, that degree keeps coming up again and again. When we talk about the conjunction with the sun and Uranus and Taurus, that degree is in opposition to that. And then Mercury, when it does its retrograde, where it goes, the degrees are matching. And where it stops and gets out of its shadow zone, it's the same degree in the sign of Taurus, which operates at the opposite degree of Scorpio, too. So remember, whenever there's an eclipse, you pay attention to where the eclipse happened, the degree in the sign, and the exact opposite of it. So if it's an eclipse in Scorpio at 1458, which means 15 degrees in Scorpio, then that means we're paying attention to all the things that are happening at 15 degrees in Taurus. So if you take nothing else away from this video, remember 15 degrees of Taurus. 15 degrees of Taurus. And I'm just realizing this is already a 17-minute video. So for part 2, we're going to look at the details. We're going to look at the chart. I'm going to have 3 charts up simultaneously, so it's going to be confusing, but I'm going to draw the lines and I won't talk about anything but the things I've already talked about. I might add a few things on because I've already done some of the homework, like, and when May comes and we have that. Anyway, there's going to be more events that are happening. And so I've got other things pulled up that I might take a peek at. I'll try to condense it and see how long it's going to be. But either way, we'll have a separate video for the Mercury retrograde. We'll have a separate video for Jupiter. So don't be too concerned about Jupiter right now. But I think that when we're trying to figure out where is this all headed, astrologically, it makes sense to look down at the end of the road. And that's, like I said, that was what all my alarms and my signals and my flags were going off, that I kept hearing, find Jupiter and follow its journey, because that's going to tell you the story. It's going to tell you the conclusion without us actually having to live through it. We'll kind of be able to at least observe. You know how you can open up a book and you kind of peek at the end? That's what we do with the astrology. We're like, oh, well, wait a minute. Holy shit, we got to here. How did we get to here? Like, what happened? And so we'll do charts and we'll figure that little journey out and the steps that we get there. Okay. So this was just a general overview, right? You didn't hear me talk about Mars or Venus, right? We didn't do any of that. This was just a general overview for the month of May 2023. But what the takeaway here is that it has a lot to do with the Jupiter retrograde that's not going to happen until the last 4 months of 2023. That's when the Jupiter retrograde occurs. Okay. So it's like we'll be reviewing some of the same themes. We'll be hearing about some of the same themes, and it's Taurus, it's money, it's banking, and it may be digital. So if you got any questions, comment below. And I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye. Below the video, I'll have all the degrees for those of you who like to pay attention to the degrees in your chart. Again, if you don't know and you want to know, just comment below.